I never thought I'd be back in this town, much less standing on our cracked driveway with a backpack slung over my shoulder and 1,000 memories clawing at my chest. The summer heat hadn't changed. Neither had the scent of dry grass and engine oil that always lingered in the air around our cul-de-sac. But Dad called it a favor, watching the house while he took Mom on a road trip. But I knew better. He wanted eyes on the place, and more specifically, on him. Next door, the shutters of the old Anderson house were open, which was rare. I spotted movement in the yard, broad shoulders, sun-warmed skin, and the same low-slung walk I remembered all too well. Micah, he was older now, same as me, but something about him still felt like trouble wrapped in a smirk. He had this way of carrying himself that made people either curious or uncomfortable. For Dad, it was always the latter. "They're bad news," he used to say, pointing across the yard like Micah was some ticking time bomb. No respect, no ambition. Just loud music and motorcycles. But when I was 16, Micah taught me how to change a tire without using a jack. He gave me my first cigarette behind the shed and laughed when I nearly choked on it. He always had dirt under his nails, but his hands were steady, warm. I remember one summer afternoon, I slipped while climbing the fence and scraped my palm. Micah was the one who pulled me down, wordless, and wiped the blood away with the edge of his worn t-shirt. He didn't make fun of me for wincing. He just looked at me for a second too long, said nothing. I've thought about that look more times than I should admit. Now, years later, here we were again. Two grown men separated by a patchy strip of lawn and a whole lot of unsaid things. I wasn't a kid anymore, and he wasn't just some curious memory. The first evening back, I heard the unmistakable thrum of his garage door rattling open. Curious, or maybe reckless, I walked to the fence and peeked over. Micah stood under the hood of his truck, shirtless, back slick with sweat. His hair had grown longer, curling slightly at the ends, and he had a faint scar along his ribs I didn't recognize. He caught me watching. "Of course he did. You staring or thinking about helping?" he asked, smirking like no time had passed. I opened my mouth, but nothing clever came out. "I wasn't sure you still lived here." "Didn't really have a reason to leave," he replied. His voice was deeper than I remembered, steadier. "Didn't think you'd be back either. Figured you left for good." I thought so too. He didn't push. Just wiped his hands on a rag and gestured toward the open garage. "You want a beer?" I hesitated. I could practically hear Dad's voice in my head, laced with warnings and disapproval. But my feet had already started moving. Inside the garage, everything was exactly as I remembered. Chaotic, cluttered, familiar. A dusty dartboard still hung crooked on the far wall. A faded photo of him and his brother was pinned beside it, both of them grinning, sunburned and shirtless on some beach. Micah handed me a cold bottle, and for a second, our fingers brushed. Stupid detail, but I felt it. We talked for a while. Small things, catching up without saying anything real. But his eyes kept drifting to mine, and mine to his. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and wondered why I'd really come back. Maybe it wasn't about the house, or Dad, or the town I swore I'd outgrown. Maybe it was him. Maybe it had always been him. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm, almost like time hadn't moved at all. I'd wake early, go for a jog past the rusted mailbox at the end of the street, then spend the rest of the morning fixing little things around the house to make Dad think I was actually keeping an eye on it. But more often than not, I found myself drifting toward the fence. And more often than not, Micah would be out there, tinkering with an engine, chain smoking, or fixing something that didn't need fixing. He wasn't the same kid who used to blare rock music out his window or sneak out past midnight on his dirt bike. But there were still traces of him in the way he talked, with that lazy confidence, and in the way he looked at me like he saw more than he let on. "You still suck at hiding," he said one afternoon, catching me mid-peek over the fence for The third time that week. Maybe you just never stopped noticing. That earned a laugh, deep and low. And I couldn't help but smile at how easy it felt to fall back into that space with him. No pressure. Just that quiet understanding we always had, where we never said too much but somehow always said enough. We talked more after that. Sometimes across the fence, sometimes while drinking beers on the hood of his truck. He'd tell me about Odd, jobs he picked up around town, the dog he almost adopted, and how his brother moved up north with his girlfriend and hadn't looked back. I didn't share much about the city or my job. I think part of me didn't want to admit how empty everything had started to feel. "You remember the summer we almost got caught sneaking into the lake?" he asked one night, tossing a bottle cap into the grass. "I remember you tripped over your own boots and fell face first into the mud." "Bullshit. You pushed me. I guided you." With enthusiasm. Micah grinned. I missed this. I wasn't sure if he meant the memories, the company, or something else entirely. But either way, I felt it too. That low ache in the chest that came with being around someone who once knew every version of you, even the ones you tried to outgrow. A few days later, the complication arrived in the form of a flat tire and a forgotten reservation. Dad's old truck, my only way into town, gave out at the worst possible time, and I'd planned to head to the campground outside the ridge that weekend. I'd promised myself some space from the neighborhood. Maybe even a little quiet reflection. But the tow guy wouldn't come until Monday. Micah, of course, had overheard the whole mess while sitting on his porch steps with a bottle of orange Gatorade. "I'll drive you out," he said simply. "You don't even know where I'm going. You're going somewhere to avoid talking to yourself. Trust me, I know the signs." He stood and dusted off his jeans. "Besides, I could use a weekend out. Place is too quiet lately." I should have said no. But instead, I nodded. We packed light. Just a tent, 2 sleeping bags, snacks, and a borrowed cooler. The drive was quieter than I expected, but not uncomfortable. He had one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the shifter, and now and then his fingers would tap to a beat only he could hear. "So, we sharing a tent?" he asked casually, as we parked beside the trailhead. "I didn't bring 2. "Bold move. You're the one who invited yourself." He smirked but didn't reply. We hiked a couple miles up the trail until the trees opened into a clearing near a slow-moving stream. The sky turned gold as we pitched the tent, our hands brushing more than once as we struggled with the poles. Every accidental touch felt heavier than it should have, like neither of us wanted to pull away too fast. By sundown, we were sitting beside a tiny fire pit we built from rocks and kindling. He handed me a beer, and we leaned back on our elbows, watching the sky shift. "You still talk in your sleep?" he asked. "You still snore?" "I don't snore." Tell that to 16-year-old me, who couldn't sleep for 3 nights, because someone sounded like a lawnmower. He rolled his eyes, but there was laughter behind it, and something softer too. Something that made the air between us stretch and hum. Later, when we finally crawled into the tent, I realized the sleeping bags were thinner than I remembered. Not cold enough to complain, but close enough to make me shift a little nearer to him, pretending it was for comfort. He didn't move away. Our arms touched, bare skin to bare skin. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, and I wondered if he could hear it too. Neither of us spoke for a long time, the silence filled with shared breath and shallow exhalations. Eventually, Micah muttered, "This feels weird." I turned slightly toward him. "Yeah, but not bad," he added, quietly, like he wasn't sure if I was still awake. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because my chest was already tight with all the things I wasn't saying. The years I'd spent wondering what if, the way he looked at me now like maybe he'd been wondering too. And just before I drifted off, I felt his hand brush against mine in the dark. Not a grab, not a hold, just a soft touch, testing, waiting. I didn't pull away. The morning light filtered in through the flimsy fabric of the tent, casting soft shadows on Micah's face. He was still asleep, arm draped over his stomach, lips slightly parted. And I was still pretending I didn't feel what I felt. Shifted carefully, the synthetic material of the sleeping bag rustling against my skin. Even that small sound made me freeze. He didn't stir, but the back of his hand grazed mine again, just like it had last night. And it felt intentional, even if I knew it wasn't, or maybe I just wanted it to be. I slipped out of the tent before he woke, trying to clear my head. The stream down the hill was cool against my fingers as I dipped them into the current. Birds chirped lazily in the distance, but my thoughts were too loud to hear much else. Micah had always made me feel something different. Even back when we were teenagers, when I didn't have the words or the confidence to name what that was. I thought I'd buried it under years of distance, city life, and adult distractions. Turns out it was just waiting. When I got back to camp, he was sitting up, shirtless, hair messy, rubbing sleep out of his eyes like some reckless daydream. My stomach flipped. "Thought you ditched me," he said, voice raspy. "Tempting," I teased, but the smile didn't quite reach my eyes. We packed up for a day hike. The plan was to circle the ridge, check out a small cave system on the map, and get back before dusk. Seemed simple enough, but of course, plans never quite stick with Micah. About 2 hours in, after we'd gone off trail to avoid a fallen tree, we lost the path entirely. His GPS app died first, no signal. Then my phone followed. The cave we'd planned to check out? We passed it without even realizing it until we were too far gone to double back with certainty. By late afternoon, we were in unfamiliar woods, sunlight thinning through the trees like an apology. "Okay," I said, trying to mask the rising tightness in my chest. "We're officially lost." "Technically misdirected," Micah corrected, pulling out a crumpled granola bar from his pocket. "We have no food, no signal, and no idea where we are. But I've got charisma," he grinned. "That's worth at least 2 protein bars." I tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. Micah looked at me, more serious this time. "We'll figure it out. Let's just find somewhere to set up camp before it gets dark." I saw a clearing not far back. We found it just as the temperature dropped, the wind picking up. We pitched the tent again, our movements slower, more tired. I could feel him watching me, checking me, reading me. "You okay?" he asked, handing me the flashlight. "Yeah, just tired." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. That night, the cold was sharper. We both climbed into the tent, fully clothed, but the chill still crept in through the floor. Without asking, Micah shifted closer. "You're shaking." "I'm fine. Don't be an idiot." He scooted in until our bodies were flush, and his arm rested lightly over my waist. My breath caught, the heat of him blooming against my side. "You always run cold," he murmured. I swallowed. Yeah. I couldn't think. Not with his chest rising and falling against my back. Not with the memory of his hand brushing mine still etched on my skin. "You remember when you got sick that summer?" he said softly, his breath warm near my ear. "I snuck over at midnight and brought you soup. Your dad almost caught me." I smiled, eyes closed. "You used the back window." "Of course I did. I wasn't stupid. You also tripped on the flower bed and nearly broke your ankle." That part was less graceful. His laugh rumbled low, and I felt it in my bones. He was doing it again, making it feel like this was normal, like this kind of closeness had always been between us, unspoken but somehow understood. And maybe it had. Maybe we'd been orbiting this for years. I turned slightly, just enough to see his face. His eyes were open too. "Micah," I whispered, not even sure what I meant to say after that. He didn't respond, just watched me, his expression unreadable. His fingers brushed against my side, a tiny movement, but deliberate. I knew it was. My heart raced. I wanted to lean in. I wanted to close the space between us, feel his breath against mine, not by accident, but by choice. But I didn't, because I didn't know what would happen if I did. If I took that leap and he wasn't ready to catch me. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured. "What?" "You get that look when your brain's going 1,000,000 miles an hour." I stared at him. "What look?" He smiled faintly. "The one where your eyes do this squinty thing, and your mouth pulls a little to the left. You've had it since you were 14. That's oddly specific. I pay attention." That silenced me. We stayed like that. Too close, not close enough, until the silence stretched again, warm and uneasy. Then he said it. Casual, but careful. "You ever think about what it would have been like if we hadn't lost touch?" I didn't breathe. "Yeah," I finally whispered. "Sometimes." He nodded, but said nothing else. Just closed his eyes and let the quiet take over again. His hand stayed at my waist, not gripping, just resting. And mine stayed over it, lightly, like maybe it belonged there. All night, I lay awake, wrapped in the scent of pine and sweat and mica, wondering what he meant by that. Wondering what he wasn't saying, wondering what I was too scared to admit. The space between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was every unsaid word, every missed moment, every heartbeat that held back. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending I didn't want more. The morning after we got lost, the woods felt quieter, like even the birds didn't want to interrupt whatever this was hanging between us. Micah hadn't moved much during the night. I knew because I hadn't slept. His arm was still resting against my side when the sun began to filter through the tent. I'd thought maybe he would shift away in his sleep, roll to the other side like usual. But he hadn't. And that was part of the problem. When he finally blinked awake, there was a second, just one, when our eyes met, and neither of us looked away. No jokes, no lazy smirk, no teasing. Just that raw, open stare that burned more than the morning light ever could. Then he cleared his throat, sat up too fast, and rubbed the back of his neck. "I think if we backtrack east, we'll hit the creek," he said, voice too casual. "Yeah," I replied, pretending I hadn't been studying the way the sun lit the line of his jaw. We packed in silence. But it wasn't empty, it was loaded. And I knew we were both feeling it, even if he kept pretending otherwise. Even if I wished I could. By midday, we found the trail again. Relief should have followed. But it didn't. It just meant this little in-between world we'd been living in, this blur of uncertainty, this bubble where things felt like maybe they could be more, was about to pop. We were almost back to the main site when the sky opened up without warning. It was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second the sun was out, the next we were running through pouring rain. Micah laughed, loud and wild like a kid. I wanted to bottle the sound. We ducked under a narrow rock outcrop, breathless and soaked. "Well," he said, water dripping off his nose, "this is romantic." My heart stuttered. He was joking. I knew that. But my body didn't. "Too bad we're missing the candlelight," I said, aiming for sarcasm but landing somewhere closer to breathless. He looked at me, still smiling but softer now. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. I blinked. "For what?" "For dragging you out here, for getting us lost, for, I don't know, all of it." "You don't have to apologize, Micah." "I do. You didn't sign up for this." I shrugged. "I'm here, aren't I?" He turned fully toward me, water still dripping from his hair, shirt clinging to his chest. "Why are you here?" The question hit harder than it should have. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." He hesitated, eyes narrowing like he was working out a math problem. "We hadn't talked in almost 2 years. Then I randomly invite you on this ridiculous trip, and you just say yes. Why?" I opened my mouth, closed it. The truth sat on my tongue like a burn. "Because I missed you," I said, barely louder than the rain. He stared at me, eyes flickering, waiting, and not just in the remember that guy from high school way, I continued, pulse thudding in my ears. "I missed you, the way you laugh, the way you never take anything seriously until suddenly it matters, the way you make it feel like nothing's too heavy if we're carrying it together." Micah didn't say anything. His throat bobbed like he was swallowing glass. I took a breath, shaky. "I don't know when it started, okay? Maybe it was always there. But somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about you like a friend. And I've been trying not to ruin what we have by saying something, but..." I finally met his eyes. I'm tired of pretending. I want more. I think I've wanted more for a long time. The silence that followed felt like the longest I'd ever lived through. I felt every drop of rain between us, every heartbeat screaming in my chest. Micah's brow furrowed, not in confusion, but like he was feeling too much at once and didn't know how to let it out. He finally spoke, voice low and raw. "Do you know how many times I've wanted to call you and couldn't figure out why it hurt so much not to?" I blinked. How many nights I sat on my balcony with a drink, just staring at our old texts, wondering what the hell I was so afraid of. I didn't breathe. I told myself I just missed the past, he continued. But then I'd see someone who looked like you and my stomach would flip. And when I heard your laugh again for the first time on this trip, I knew I wasn't imagining it. He stepped forward slowly, like each inch was a confession of its own. I've never said this out loud, not to anyone, but I know, I feel the same. I didn't realize I was crying until he reached up and wiped the corner of my eye with his thumb. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because I was terrified that once I knew what this was, I couldn't pretend anymore." "And now?" He smiled faintly, eyes shining with something terrifying and beautiful. "Now I don't want to pretend." The space between us was gone before I even realized I'd moved. His hand cupped my jaw, tentative, fingers trembling slightly against my skin. I leaned into the touch like I'd been waiting for it my whole life. We kissed, slow, unsure at first, more breath than pressure. But then I felt him melt into it, felt the way his lips parted, how his other hand slid to the back of my neck like he'd been dreaming of this too. And maybe he had. The rain was still coming down, soaking us through, but neither of us cared. We were already submerged in something deeper when we finally pulled back, foreheads pressed together, our breaths mixed in the narrow air between us. "So now what?" I whispered. He smiled. "Now we stop running from it." I exhaled a laugh, half joy, half disbelief. He kissed my forehead, lips warm despite the chill. "Let's go home," he said, "and figure it out together." The rain finally eased as we walked back to camp, but neither of us noticed the chill. Our fingers brushed a few times before Micah just took my hand outright. No drama, no big gesture, just a simple, quiet decision. We didn't say much at first. I think we were both afraid to disturb whatever fragile new thing had just taken shape between us. But once we reached the tent, the quiet turned into something softer. We changed out of our wet clothes, faces turned politely away, but hearts racing in sync. There was a new energy now, a warm current pulsing beneath the surface. Micah tossed me one of his dry shirts. "You're definitely keeping that. It looks way better on you." I pulled it over my head, raising an eyebrow. "You just want an excuse to get me into your clothes." He smirked. "And what if I do?" I stared at him a beat too long. "Then I'd say you're about 3 years late." He laughed, and for the first time in days, maybe years, it felt like something had clicked into place. The old comfort was still there, but it was threaded with something deeper now. Every look, every word, felt like it carried more weight. but in the best way. We settled into our sleeping bags again. Side by side this time, no pretense of distance. He lay on his side, facing me, elbow propped under his head. "You know," he said, his voice low. "I still can't believe you said it first." "Me neither." I gave a weak laugh. "I thought I'd die with that secret." He reached out and ran a thumb along my knuckles. "So what changed?" I met his gaze. "I guess I finally decided I'd rather lose you knowing I tried than keep pretending I didn't want you." His fingers stilled against my hand. "You're not gonna lose me," he said, more certain than I'd ever heard him. "We'll figure it out. I don't care what anyone else thinks." I studied his face in the dim light. "Even if it gets complicated?" Micah nodded. "Especially if it gets complicated." It wasn't a fairy tale. We both knew that. We had different lives, different expectations waiting back in the real world. But in that tent, with the forest whispering around us and his hand warm in mine, it felt like maybe we could outrun the fear. "Do you remember?" I said quietly. "That time in high school when you broke up with that girl and crashed on my couch for a week?" Micah groaned. "God, yeah. I was a mess. You made me rewatch The Dark Knight 4 times. He grinned. "Worth it." I nudged him. "You talked in your sleep. Said my name once." His eyes widened. "You're lying." "Nope." He was blushing now, color blooming beneath his freckles. "You never told me that." I didn't know what it meant back then. I just never forgot. Micah shook his head in disbelief, then leaned in and kissed my cheek. "I'm sorry it took me this long to catch up." "You're here now," I said, turning my face slightly so our foreheads touched again. For a while we just lay there, quiet, close, breathing each other in. "You know we'll probably mess this up sometimes," he murmured. "Yeah, we might argue. Or freak out. Probably both." He laughed softly. "But I don't want to go back to pretending you're just my buddy. I can't." I traced the line of his wrist with my thumb. "Then don't." Another pause. Another soft breath. "Okay," he whispered. "Let's not." The way he said it, like a promise sealed with rain and silence and heartache, felt more real than anything. I closed the small space between us and kissed him again. Slower this time. Surer. And when we finally fell asleep tangled up together, I dreamed not of what we had been, but of everything we were becoming. By morning the forest was quiet again, just the soft hum of wind in the trees and the occasional chirp of a bird waking up before the sun. The kind of stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath, just for us. Micah stirred beside me, his hand still loosely laced with mine. I watched the way his face softened in sleep, a slight crease between his brows that always relaxed when he was near me. It struck me, all at once, how long I'd been waiting to see him like this. Not just close, but open. Real. He blinked awake slowly, squinting through the soft light filtering in through the tent flap. "Morning," he mumbled, voice scratchy. "Morning," I whispered back. Neither of us moved right away. There was no need to rush. The usual tension I felt in moments like this, worrying he'd pull away or pretend nothing happened, was gone. Replaced by something steady, gentle, solid. He stretched a little, then rolled to face me. "I wasn't dreaming, right? That stuff we said last night?" I shook my head. "No dream. You kissed me, remember?" A slow smile curved his lips. "Right. That was good. Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual, even as my heart turned over again. We eventually emerged from the tent and packed up camp, still moving in sync like we always had. But now, every glance and touch had a new layer beneath it, an unspoken understanding that we were no longer pretending. Not to ourselves, not to each other. Micah handed me my thermos and leaned against the truck as we sipped our lukewarm coffee. "So," he said, eyes on the trees, "what happens when we get back?" I looked at him carefully. "You mean, besides my dad realizing I've been smiling too much and assuming I did something illegal?" He snorted. "I meant, with us." I hesitated, then set my thermos down and turned fully toward him. "I don't know every answer, but I know I want this, however we figure it out." Micah nodded slowly. "Me too. Even if it's messy. It will be. Even if your dad threatens to move the fence another 2 feet into our yard." I laughed. "He probably will." Micah reached into his bag and pulled out something small, a rock. Smooth, flat. The same one I'd skipped across the lake the day we arrived. He held it up between us. "You kept it?" I asked, surprised. He shrugged. "You said it was your lucky one. I figured if I held on to it, maybe it'd bring me some luck too." I reached for it, but he closed his fingers around mine. "Actually, I want you to have it back, but only if you promise to let me stick around long enough to be part of whatever luck it brings you." My throat tightened. "Micah." "I'm serious," he said, softer now. "I don't care how complicated things get. I just want to try, with you." I stared at our joined hands, his calloused, warm grip, the stone tucked between us, and felt something settle deep in my chest. "I promise," I said. We didn't need a grand gesture. That little rock, held between 2 shaky hands and steady hearts, was enough. On the drive back, we played music like we always had, but the air was different, lighter, fuller. At one point, he reached over and rested his hand on my thigh without saying a word. I didn't move it. As we pulled into town, I glanced at him. "You know, people might talk." Micah raised an eyebrow. "Let 'em. Let's give 'em something good to talk about." We both laughed. And it wasn't nervous anymore. It was honest. He walked me up to my front door, lingering even though he didn't have to. I gave him a look. "You know you've basically declared war by stepping onto this porch," he grinned. "Then I guess I'll have to win your dad over with my charm." God help us all. Micah leaned in and pressed a quick, warm kiss to my cheek. "See? You tomorrow?" "Yeah," I said, still holding the rock in my palm. "See you tomorrow." As I watched him walk back to his truck, I realized something. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the very beginning. The start of something slow and real, built on years of almosts and a single, unshakable truth. No matter how messy it got, no matter what walls had to come down, we'd found something worth keeping. And this time, neither of us was letting go.